We use the one-dimensional classification system to classify our skill. The one-dimensional classification consists of different categories on a continuum with two distinct ends. A netball shot is a closed skill because it is initiated by the individual and the environmental context doesn't change. It is a gross motor skill because it uses large muscle groups to produce a shot, and it is a discrete skill because it has a clear beginning and end to the skill. Using Gentile's taxonomy of skill classification, a netball shot consists of inter-trial variability because the conditions during the shot can vary, object manipulation and having a stationary body. You place it in these categories because you are in control of how and when the ball moves. You are stationary when you shoot the ball, but the distance from the ring can vary.
Break down the skill into four key aspects. These are stance and stability, position of the ball in the hands, transfer of momentum or bending the knees, and the projection of the ball. We base each week's drills off these components. Stability is a key component in the beginning of a netball shot. A solid base of support is crucial in order to maximise stability, thus translating into a more accurate skill execution. In those 3 seconds, the player has to stable their body and maintain the centre of gravity in preparation of the shot. A study by Elliott and Smith in 1983 found that skilled netball shooters also maintained a relatively upright trunk position, leaning backwards slightly with their head upright. The ball should sit on all fingertip pads and thumb in one hand, and the fingers should be spread evenly across the ball. The other hand should be resting against the ball to give it extra stability and control. When releasing the ball, the wrist should continue in a flicking motion and the ball should roll off the fingers, with the fingers being the last guidance to the ball. Flexing of the knee is crucial to ensure sufficient force generation during the extension phase of the shooting action to propel the ball into the goal ring. The simultaneous action of bending the knees and elbows, followed by the light flick of the wrist, allows momentum to be transferred from the knees through the arms and up into the wrist and transferred into the ball to produce a force that allows greater release height and greater release velocity. Projectile motion refers to the motion of an object projected at an angle in the air. A study done by Elliott and Smith in 1983 found that the average angle of release in netball shooting equated to 59.8 degrees from the horizontal. The release of the netball would be slightly above 45 degrees and between 70 degrees. However, this figure would be affected by the height of the defender. A good goaler will be able to control the direction and amount of force being manipulated on the ball and be able to judge the required amount of force and velocity to execute the goal. Coaching was given through side-by-side directions with verbal feedback alongside verbal cues. The verbal cues given were bend your knees, flick the wrist, and lollipop the ball. Verbal cues are designed to produce a quick response in the brain to recall information. In this case, the verbal cue bend your knees reminds the player to produce that action, as they know the power of the shot comes from their knees.
She's been playing netball for a few years as a mid-court player, but her coach wants her to play as a shooter. The transfer from previous experience that Dana brings to the skill is positive and includes already having the accurate ball skills, driving skills and hand-eye coordination to perform basic netball passing skills. According to Fitz, Dana is in the cognitive stage of learning because she is just starting to learn and understand different aspects of the skill. It takes up a lot of her attention and she's likely to make a numerous number of errors. The purpose of a pre-test is to get a baseline measurement or a starting point of skill performance / pre-existing knowledge, so we are able to use it as a comparison to see how much learning has occurred and how much information the player has retained after the 4 weeks when a post-test has been performed. We chose an around the world type test where we mapped out different spots around the netball goal circle with various distances from the ring. We measured the success of the test quantitatively by the number of goals scored out of 10 attempts. Dana achieved 2 out of 10 in her pre-test.
In week 1 of training, we focused on learning the key aspects of goal shooting without any time pressure or defensive pressure. Each week we used drills based off those using the International Federation of Netball Association coaching manual and from the Sports Plan Netball website. The drills we conducted included stationary shooting from different positions around the goal circle, as this allowed the player to become familiar with the whole motion of the netball shot and work out what techniques suit them best. The player was told to use visualization before each shot. They were told to imagine a cone sitting above the ring and instructed to hit the top of the imaginary cone and squish it with the ball so the ball goes up and directly in the ring. A study conducted by Eddy and Nicola 2003 found that the use of imagery techniques to imagine performing a specific sports skill has been shown to improve the physical performance of that. Using the mind, an athlete can register positive images over and over, enhancing the skill through repetition or rehearsal. Similar to physical practice, we use whole practice, which is used when the task is in low complexity, which allows the player to focus on one skill, and high in organisation. We use block practice, which involves repeating the basics of the skill. We decided to do 4 half-an-hour sessions a week to train, as Simon and Bjork 2001 showed that block practice resulted in superior performance during acquisition phase. We use augmented feedback, both concurrent and terminal. Feedback was also given to the player on the way the ball was held in the hand and the projection of the shot. They were also reminded to bend their knees and flick the wrist after every shot. Our verbal cue for this week is bend your knees.
In week 2, we continued to learn the basic stages of a skill. The drills for this week were shooting from different positions around the ring, but also focusing on driving into the circle, receiving a pass, then taking a shot. Driving into the circle replicates an in-game environment where attackers are required to drive around the goal circle to be available to receive a pass. This helps focus on the stability and stance before taking a shot, because the player won't have centre of gravity straight after landing and needs to adjust. By being on the move to receive a pass, it is teaching the player how to stop and regain balance to take the time to get into position to make a successful shot, which is unlike last week where she was already stable before shooting. Once again, we used whole and block practice and both concurrent and terminal augmented feedback. Our verbal cues for this week were bend your knees, flick your wrist, and lollipop.
Week 3's training consisted of adding in a defender to the previous week's drills to add an extra pressure to the situation and try to replicate more of a game-like scenario. At this point, it is hoped that the player will start to leave the cognitive stage of learning and reach the associative stage of learning, where she understands how the aspects of the skill interrelates and she starts to adapt to different situations. The player did not have to adhere to the time restraints, so they were able to adapt to the new environment, where a defensive player and pressure puts an attacker under stress. Feedback was still given in this week, however the player was encouraged to try and pick up on their own mistakes and learn from it when shooting was involved.
In week 4, we added time pressure to the previous week's objectives. This meant that the player couldn't take her time as much anymore. She only had 3 seconds to take the shot, which again is replicating a match situation and match rules. By now the player will be in the associative stage of learning. We gave even less feedback this week, only giving it when she asked for it, or hoping that the player would be able to realise some of the mistakes she was making and work out how to fix them on her own. After the 4 weeks, we conducted a post-test. The post-test was the same format as the pre-test. The purpose of conducting a post-test is to measure how much learning has occurred as a result of the 4 weeks of training. The post-test score was 5 out of 10.
The purpose of a transfer test is to assess the adaptability aspect of performance changes relating to learning. We chose a similar format to the pre and post-test, but instead, the player had to take a step back before her shot. So therefore she would be standing on one leg when shooting, reducing her stance and stability, leading the player to focus heavily on their technique.
2 weeks later, a retention test was performed. The reason a retention test is conducted is to see how much of the skill and knowledge of the task has been retained. The skill was the exact same as the pre and post test, so we can gauge a reliable sense of how much retention occurred.